This data is insane.
5.2% right now, roughly double what it was during the middle of the pandemic.
Markets are pulling back fast. Reventure Consulting's video is going viral, and for good reason. He's outlining a nightmare-made reality for many recent homebuyers, where markets are pulling back so strong that recent investors are going to be losing 5 or 6 figures overnight in home equity. Watch that video. But there's even more to this story. BiggerPockets just released an article outlining whether you should put your long-term rental on the short-term rental space for disparaged current homeowners, where in their cool as a cucumber writing style, they outline whether you should consider short-term rentals and the things you should consider when factoring in whether the risk is worth it for you. So what will this all mean? If you're an Airbnb owner, this video is going to show you how you might just be in for the fight of your life this year. And if you're looking to get in the space, there's going to be blood in the water soon. And this could be a great opportunity for you to get into the short-term rental space. Now, because I don't want anybody to go out of business, I don't think that's fair. This video is going to be a how to survive video, but filled with facts. So all of you casual onlookers can, of course, get a state of the market, but I'm here for you, the operator, so you can stay in business. If you use this video, your operating costs will drop 20% and you will outperform the rest of your competitors. If you don't use this video, you're going to lose your Airbnb property to someone else who took notes. Let's jump in. All right, we're gonna put some numbers up so you can better understand how Airbnbs tend to operate, so you can see that there's room for operational efficiency here. We're gonna use a hypothetical example where all listings are 3 bedrooms. Just absolutely all of them. This is the one thing that's going to stay static. Everything else can actually change here. Let's say housekeeping costs, we'll use H for housekeeping costs, are typically for the average host $200. And the revenue of a property based on somebody's pricing strategy, in this case, is typically $8,000. They're going to revenue $8,000, and then from that comes their costs. So with a typical homeowner, you take your $8,000 and you start to subtract. Well, $200 per housekeeping. Well, the average number of reservations in a month is probably about 6 to 8. So let's say $1,200 is their housekeeping costs. Put them at $6,800. Now, this is where the first bit of competitive advantage can come from. People have co-hosts. Almost every regular owner that doesn't have any scale has a co-host. So from the $6,800, they're gonna take typically 25% of revenue. 25% of revenue in this case is $1,700, leaving someone with $5,100 to handle the rest of their costs. With the rest of their costs here, their mortgage may only be, say, $2,000, and their utilities, everything else, supplies, everything else, might be $1,000, leaving them with a total cash flow of $2,100. That is pretty darn good, but that's in a regular environment. Let's say with this static pricing strategy, things start to change and you don't make as much money. And instead of $8,000, you actually only make $5,500. Now the $2,500 drop, it will affect how much a co-host charges you, but not by terribly much. You're still gonna pay, probably around $1,300 here. And so now you've actually broken even on that because you have a co-host. If your revenue drops, your co-host and your fixed costs can lead you to being like a break-even property really, really fast. Let's look at a different scenario. Let's say that instead of this being a co-hosted property, this is an arbitrage property. Most arbitrage properties are operators that are looking to get into the space and actually build a business. And that's why the cost structure is slightly different. They don't have a co-host because they want to do it themselves. The person who does arbitrage is not a passive investor who's flipped into short-term rentals. They're a person who got into hospitality for the sake of getting the hospitality. This is their job. So you owners need to recognize that arbitragers, this is their job, where you just own a property and give it to a co-host. So how this looks, that same $8,000 in revenue with that same $200 housekeeping equals $1,200. Leads you to that same $6,800 net revenue. So now from here, their cost for utilities and supplies was still $1,000. And instead of a $2,000 mortgage, they might even be paying $2,500 in rent, right? They pay $500 more because it's not their mortgage. Now in this case, that leaves their cash flow at $3,300. If they only made $5,500 like the last example here, they would still cash flow $100. Now, I would say in this scenario, the fact that they cash flowed $800 offset with the fact that you cash flowed $0, you still have an advantage, which is that your mortgage gets paid and you get some debt pay down. You probably get more than $1,000 a month in debt pay down if your mortgage is $2,000, or it might be right on the nose $1,000 a month if your mortgage is $2,000, depending on your interest rate, blah, blah, blah. This could be a break-even scenario for homeowners and co-hosts. But in both cases. And this is what leads us to competitive advantage. It doesn't matter if you're an owner or somebody who does arbitrage. Now here's where you can actually generate more money than your competition. And you as owners need to start getting out of the passive mindset to make some things happen. So let's look at these numbers a different way. So first, there's the concept of dynamic pricing, where that $8,000 per month static with a regular, just like set it and forget it pricing strategy, that's cool. But I had a 3-bedroom apartment in Houston, that was doing about $12,000 a month. A typical increase of 30% on revenue is actually pretty common when somebody goes and pushes into pricing strategy. So let's say that with dynamic pricing, you increase your prices to $11,500. This is because you stop using 2-day minimums in situations. This is because you also drop your weekday prices way below what you would ever accept for your home, because you stop having a sense of ego about your property. Your price is going to be what it's going to be, or it's not going to be anything. If you don't get booked one day, that's $0 in revenue. So you're actually pushing towards 100% occupancy at all costs with revenue management. And so with revenue management, you can now increase your prices to $11,500, and compared to that $8,000, $11,500 is $2,500 more. Now, if you're using a co-host, remember that $3,500, you don't get to keep it all. You're giving nearly $1,000 of that away to a co-host, which means you'll still get $2,500 more in cash flow easy when using a co-host, or you get about $3,750 if you keep it yourself or something like that. That was actually revenue here. Now, let's say for housekeeping, instead of paying $200 per housekeeping, let's say you start paying your housekeepers by the hour, like say $15 an hour, and it takes 6 hours to clean your place. Well, that's $90, right? And on say 6 housekeepings, you just saved $110 on 6 housekeepings, actually increase your net pocket revenue $660 per month just by changing your housekeepers. How cool is that? These additions, the extra $3,500 in revenue from dynamic pricing, extra $660 from hiring your own housekeepers, paying them by the hour, this is an extra $4,160 that you get on the same property. That's $4,160 of cash flow, where for the owner who has a co-host, you're looking at maybe even as low as break even on some bad months, or cash flowing a couple $1,000s in good months, where the arbitrage person, cash flows $800 to $3,300 a month. This extra $4,000 more than doubles your average net profit on a property, which is insane. And this total doesn't include the fact that you fire your co-host. In the case that a co-host was collecting 20% of your after housekeeping revenue, remember this was $6,800 before, and then they collected $1,700 in fees. Instead, if you hire your own persons by the hour, pay them by the week, and you start to scale, let's say you have 5 or 7 properties, and you pay somebody $1,000 a week on 7 properties. Now you take these properties, multiply them by 7 because you're scaling. You're nearly at $11,500 per property. You're at nearly $80,000, nearly. And if you pay $1,000 per week in a salary for somebody to do everything a co-host would do, that puts you at $76,000 net income. And then of course, your housekeeping costs, if you're paying $90 per housekeeping times 6, you're still paying just over $500. You're paying $560 times 7, which is going to give you about a housekeeping cost of $4,000 per month. That puts you at $72,000 after housekeeping and admin, right? And then you pay your mortgages. 7 times 2,000 is 14,000 here. And you pay your utilities and supplies, which is another 7,000 here. So 21,000 off that. Now you're keeping $51,000 on 7 properties because you did a few things. You did revenue management. You lowered your housekeeping costs, creating an efficiency of over $600 a month. And you cut the 20% co-hosting cost and turned that into a flat $4,000 divided by 7 because you have 7 properties. So you're looking at just under $600 per property per month in operating expenses. Less than $600 per month, where that co-host that was coming here without increasing your revenue, they're collecting $1,700 in this case, and they'd be collecting over $2,000 in this case. But instead now you're only paying $600. These are the type of operational efficiencies that you could win. Now, it doesn't matter if you do arbitrage or not, you can still increase your housekeeping efficiency and do a better job with revenue management. And if you own your property, you can do both of those and fire your co-host, creating way more cash. So let's talk about this Bigger Pockets article. They are essentially pushing long-term rental inventory into the short-term rental space with articles like this. Bigger Pockets is the biggest piece of media I can think of for anybody who owns their property. If you've ever considered buying your first home, you've probably seen Bigger Pockets articles, Bigger Pockets videos, listen to Bigger Pockets podcasts. Now this is good for hosts because the way that Bigger Pockets is pushing people into the short-term rental space, they're selling an expensive dream. Bigger Pockets doesn't understand short-term rentals from the side that a business operator would. They only understand short-term rentals from the side that an investor typically would. The fact that they're entertaining hiring a co-host at all is what's going to make this expensive for future hosts, and this is how we're going to compete. We still have to respect the fact that BiggerPockets and articles like this could push a bunch of this inventory into the space, but they're going to push it in an expensive way. See, the truth is most people who own long-term rentals did so they could have passive income. And BiggerPockets in this article says you can hire a co-host for 15 to 30% of your revenue, or you can self-manage, but that's going to be a lot of work and it's going to be hard. And even if you hire a co-host, you're still going to cash flow better than if you had a long-term rental. The premise of this article pretty much leans towards hiring a co-host if you do it, which means that anybody who enters the space under this context is going to have a 15 to 30% haircut off their revenue before they get to their true operating expenses. And that's going to be how you stay competitive in this space. And in a way, that's the most important part of this article, because they do give a full balanced consideration to getting into the long-term space, talking about net operating income, what you should expect to cash flow, risks to your property, like damage to your property, whether regulations would even allow you to short-term rent, stuff like that. Inside of all of that objectivity, they give one very bad piece of advice, which is to hire a co-host. And the reason why that this is going to matter is if the short-term rental space inflates because of BiggerPockets, there'll be a bunch of co-hosts that get new properties. And if you want to do some co-hosting, now's a great time to really push this article and you say, hey, Mr. Owner, Mrs. Owner, would you like to have us co-host your property? Because remember, if you're on the operating side of being a co-host, it's the best deal in the world. You don't have rent payments, you don't have mortgage payments, you're not on the hook for the electric bill or restocking supplies. You are literally just collecting 15, 20, 25% of their revenue. So you're going to do all the operating with none of the downside risk. As we grow our portfolio, we are almost entirely arbitrage, and we've got a very, very small handful of co-hosting deals, because as I tell you, if you're an owner, you should not hire a co-host because the deal is just so good for us. And obviously I could be taking food off of my own plate by telling you this. If you self-manage, you'll save 15 to 30% of your revenue. And when the going gets tough or there's oversupply in the markets, the people who will suffer a loss the quickest will be homeowners who have co-hosts. Then the second tier of people at risk are going to be people who do rental arbitrage that are also not performing too well. Owners of properties are more price efficient if they self-manage by maybe 10 to 15%. And that's also if they have their own housekeepers. And this, of course, is where the arbitrage starts to compete with homeowners again, because at scale with arbitrage, and that's the whole point of renting properties, is if you have 100 of them, you can start to hire your own housekeepers and lower your cost basis. My housekeeping costs are about $25 per housekeeping, where most homeowners, they're paying 3x to 4x for the housekeepings of properties the same size. So my one-bedroom apartments, we pay about $25, and my 3 bedrooms, we pay about $40 in labor. Imagine only paying $40 to have your 3-bedroom house cleaned. That'd be super cheap, right? And this is where that increased cost basis from rent gets offset by scale. These levels of competitive advantage can be visualized much like the game Age of Empires, going from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age to, like, say, the Space Age, like Star Trek style. Now, the persons who get into the space and know absolutely nothing and just write a check for a co-host are pretty much in the Stone Age. They have absolutely no control of their property. They have no academic knowledge of what's going on. The environment is just happening to them. These people, if something goes wrong and their co-hosts can't figure it out, they won't be able to figure it out, and they'll just all go down in flames together. Now, starting to learn how to run your own business is really what pushes you into that innovation. You should know pricing strategy. You should know how it affects your occupancy. You should know how it affects the risk profile of the guests that book with you. You should know how to clean your own place. You should know how to hire your own housekeepers, train them from scratch, so that way you can say, this is how you clean, and I'm going to pay you a salary, or I'm going to pay you an hourly wage. You should know how to, message guests and manage guest resolutions and seek payments from them, seek payments from Airbnb through the arbitration process when Airbnb doesn't, resolve your claim in your favor. There's all sorts of things that you'll learn about running an Airbnb business. That knowledge base, even if you don't build to scale or actually execute any real competitive advantage, really puts you in the upper middle of the market. And then it's at that point that you can really start to do some stuff that no one else does. And that's where we get into, I would say, the space age of this, which is if you know revenue management well, and you can learn to automate it through a system like Wheelhouse or Price Labs, and then have somebody on top managing this automated pricing system to completely maximize your revenue. There's tricks that you can use within revenue management to start to manage so many other things, like how many people check in or check out on holidays. And if you have 100 properties and need to manage your housekeeping staff, you want to control how many people check in or check out on holidays. And you start to see how everything works together into one well-oiled machine. So we have 20 housekeeping staff. We have 120, soon to be nearly 200 properties on the way, because right now is a really good time to be picking up arbitrage contracts, and we're able to hire people for salary, hourly wages. Most of our staff are at a controlled cost that brings down our total operating load to under 10% of our revenue, which is super important. So we pay 10% to admin and staff, and then we pay our rents, we pay our utility bills, and we get to keep everything else, which puts our net operating income at 30 to 35% on average, which is really good for not owning a piece of property. And the 80 doors that we're picking up, we're getting free rent at all of them. We've told every single landlord we want free rent. That allows us to build our cash basis on the way up. And these things, maximizing your revenue through free cash from landlords, good pricing strategy, buying down your operating costs, these all are necessary if you're going to operate at a very high level in the short-term rental space. And if you do all these well, then in an adverse market where everything's pulling back or people stop traveling or just no matter what is in the news that could scare any other investor or host, you won't have to be worried about it, because when the going gets tough, it's the bottom that falls out of the market. And if you're the absolute best, you're good. Just manage your cash, manage your operating expenses, and you'll do just fine. So if this is all going to make sense for you, you need to understand that there's a few different market forces at play. There will be times of high revenue, there'll be times of low revenue in the short-term rental space. There's going to be times of high supply and times of low supply in the short-term rental space. These actually tend to tail each other. If revenues start to go up and the getting gets good, then a lot of people get into the space. But we're looking at a unique time in the world now, which is that long-term rentals may not be so good. And in the case that long-term rentals pull back, as an alternative, people could get pushed into the short-term rental space, even though the revenues aren't necessarily getting better, they're just looking better compared to long-term rentals. And this will push supply into the market. Now, in times of high supply, not everyone is going to get booked. So no matter what product you have, considerations of competing on price are going to be a part of your just daily playbook for staying in business. In times of high revenue and low supply, the best properties always get booked, and even the ones that get left behind tend to also get booked because there's nothing else to get booked. Now imagine a world where 25% of all short-term rentals don't get booked, where there's going to be a high chunk of what is booked, that's 75%. Now within that 75%, there will always be the best of the best properties where people who don't care about price just want the best properties and will always book the best properties. So the best of the best will always survive. It's really cool that people will be insulated like that. So go quality properties. But there's going to be a large chunk of this that is an intersection of value and price. And so there will be super cheap properties that aren't good that don't get booked. There are going to be great properties that are too expensive that don't get booked. Now, there's going to be good properties that learn to modify their price for the market, and those good properties will get booked when the great ones aren't, because the great ones are just priced out of the market for that moment in time. Price fluctuation is inevitable in a competitive market, especially one with oversupply. This begs the question of operational efficiency. If you don't have your costs under control, if you're paying your housekeepers $300 per housekeeping, if you have a co-host charging you 15 to 30% of your revenue, if you're not operating a dynamic pricing strategy that gets you premium nights booked first, and then of course filling the rest of your calendar with what you can get, those three inefficiencies alone will cause you to go out of business when everyone else can outcompete you, because our housekeeping prices are lower. We have all internal staff. We don't have to pay a co-host. And our dynamic pricing strategy is like an all-weather strategy where we get big bookings and then we start to fill in the rest of our calendar once we start to get good bookings. It's just the way that it works. And lucky for you, I've got a pricing strategy playlist here on YouTube, so you can start to catch up with some of my pricing strategy, because I think this is one of the most important things you can do to monitor. Even if you do have a co-host, you should be watching how they price your listing, because most people don't do this well, even co-hosts. And the price for you on the other side of this all is that as people start to unload their properties, now you can go buy some properties. You can buy some more properties. In about a year and a half, when people try long-term, they fail. They try short-term, they fail. They don't want to do it anymore. They're beat up, they're emotionally exhausted, and they just want to get out of the investing space. They're going to sell their stuff. And if they sell their stuff to you, you can buy it at a discount. You might even be able to buy fully furnished properties ready to Airbnb, where that Airbnb failed, but you can go back and look at their listing and go, oh, I can see exactly why you failed. I won't make those same mistakes. I'm already better than you, so let me buy your property. And now you have another ready to go turnkey property that you can operate profitably while someone else failed on the same product. That is why short-term rentals is not real estate, because the same property ran well can profit $4,000 or $5,000 a month, where that same property not ran well can lose a couple $1,000s a month. You don't get those kinds of swings in the real estate market from property manager to property manager, do you? No. There are so many aspects of operational efficiency here, shows that this is truly a business. Treat it like a business. You'll make a ton of money. Everyone else will cry and die, and you'll be here liking and subscribing for more videos with twice as many or 3 times as many properties as you did last year. I want that for you. So stick around. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the other side.